Good evening, folks. This is your hillbilly historian in the hills of East Tennessee, coming to you with history you won't find in your history books, high school or college. But tonight, I want to give you some information that's more of a theory than a historical fact. So we are going to go a little bit off base here and dive into the conspiracy theory area of history, and I'm going to give you a real earth-shaking historical theory that has never been proven true, but has a lot of circumstantial evidence behind it. Now, the sinking of the Titanic. Was it or was it not the biggest insurance scam in the history of the world? Now, the White Line, which owned the Titanic, was purchased by J.P. Morgan, a big banker from North America, and they had another ship called the Olympic, which sailed before the Titanic, and it had an accident with another boat or ship in New York Harbor and tore a big hole in it, and they had to shore that up, patch it up, and then it had a infamous collision with a British destroyer in the Irish Sea, which was forceful enough to actually bend the keel on the Olympic and caused the Olympic to sail with a 3-degree lisp, which meant it never sailed upright again after that, had its keel bent. And the Olympic also had a coal bin fire that they could not put out. It was one of those deep coal bin fires that burned deep down inside, and they couldn't put it out, and it just burned on and on and on. And those coals would get hot and they'd stay hot for years. But the Olympic had a lot of bad luck. Now, if the Olympic were to sink, say in 1912, J.P. Morgan would have only gotten $5 million for it. But as a brand new Titanic sank on its maiden voyage, he would get $12 million. 2.5 times as much from a sinking of the Titanic. And here's where the conspiracy begins. The weekend before the Titanic was to sail, everything aboard the Titanic was switched with the Olympic, and all the names on the lifeboats and everything on the fronts of the ships was modified to where the Olympic became the Titanic. And when people boarded what they thought was the Titanic, they were boarding the Olympic. And J.P. Morgan canceled his voyage on the Titanic just days before the Titanic was to sail. And he also had a lot of belongings loaded in the hull of the Titanic, which he had taken off the Titanic and brought back to shore there in England before the Titanic sailed. So basically he canceled his trip and that of his purchases, his belongings. he got them off that ship before it sailed. And there were survivors who claimed the Titanic had a small lisp or tilt, that it did not sail level or upright and during its maiden voyage. And back in those days, nobody worried about icebergs. They never slowed down for them. You could see them from miles away. It was real easy to steer around them. Most icebergs set relatively still. Any motion on their part was very slow, so it was real easy to see icebergs and it was real easy to get around them. And supposedly the Titanic had lookouts and everything, and they could see icebergs from way off and they could miss them. And according to navigational experts, the iceberg was spotted early enough for the Titanic to miss it, but the intent was not to miss it. The intent was to hit the iceberg, rip the whole side of the Titanic open, and let her sink. And that is what happened. The Titanic had plenty of time to get around that iceberg, but it wasn't the Titanic, it was the Olympic, and it was supposed to be sunk that night. Now, there was another passenger ship owned by the White Lines, owned by J.P. Morgan, that sailed out there in the middle of the Atlantic with no passengers, but a whole lot of blankets and a full crew. And they went out there and they were supposed to rescue all the passengers off the Titanic. And but they got confused. There was a sealer, a ship hunting seals on icebergs, and they would fire rockets to lighten up icebergs to see if there were any seals on it, and then they would sail up next to the iceberg and kill the seals and bring them aboard. Seal skins were very valuable in those days, and hunting seals was very valuable for a lot of these people to do, and there was one of them out there, and they were firing flares so they could see if there were any seals on these icebergs or not, see if they wanted to go to that iceberg and kill the seals. And this rescue ship that was out there in the middle of the Atlantic, they saw all the flares from that ship and they chased after it, thinking it was the Titanic. But anyway, yeah, the Titanic sank. J.P. Morgan got us $12 million. And the Olympic sailed, I think, for another several years. It transported troops across the Atlantic from the United States to England. It was used quite a bit, and therefore they got a lot of service out of that ship. And J.P. Morgan got rid of the real Olympic and got $12 million insurance money on it. So he did real well. And that is considered one of the greatest insurance scams in the history of America and possibly the history of the world. The switch of the Olympic with the Titanic, and it was the Olympic that was sunk, that had a bent keel, had been in some crashes, had a cold storage bin with a fire they couldn't put out, and so it was pretty much a wasted ship, and it was used uh, as the Titanic, and it was discardable, and it was an insurance scam. It was sank intentionally. They did not intend for that many people to die. Something like 1,500 people died. And of course, J.P. Morgan did not intend for that many people to die, but he had no conscience. He never confessed to this insurance scam, this crime, and he wouldn't. He lived the rest of his life as a multi millionaire and a very, very wealthy man. And there's no skin off his back. In fact, he pocketed wealth in sinking this Olympic instead of what was supposed to be in the Titanic. And that, there is no real evidence that this scam actually took place. And so if it happened, it happened. But we're not for sure, but this is one of the great conspiracy theories of history. The switching of the Olympic and the Titanic right before they sailed, and the sinking of the Olympic to gain greater insurance from that event. And that is from your hillbilly historian here in the hills of East Tennessee, giving you a skeptical piece of history about J.P. Morgan and the Titanic. Good evening, folks.